Chapter 17. Henrietta's Diary. I cannot say now, despite the coming of spring to Plas Wern Las, that I am happy. Ever since the sale of a portion of the land was completed, income more than meets expenditure, but I still feel an unaccountable sense of unease. Mr. Micawber was wrong. Dickens was wrong. Complete happiness is not achievable by the mere meeting of one's financial responsibilities. I have always known that an accountant's approach to reality lacklustre. Yet at the same time, when I'm walking in the woods near the house, strolling through the carpet of daffodils that Sylvia loves so much, I feel both a quickening and a debility. The quickening comes from the time of year. I've often felt that it is an improvement in the weather, not music, that soothes the savage breast. Light spring breezes from the sea reach us here at Plas Wern Las, and the sea always reminds me of my father. He is now, I am afraid, a stern memory that is fuzzy at the edges, and is sometimes brought into too sharp a clarity by the acute images I know I have remembered from old photographs. There is, for instance, the small semicircular portrait he had taken in Carmarthen a year before he left us. In it, he is still a handsome man. He stands with one arm on a small table on which there is a sextant or some other navigational instrument. The other hand grips the lapel of his frock coat as he gazes into the middle distance. A stern man with clear eyes. A practical visionary of the sort that West Wales produced by the score during the last century, and whose legacy we must preserve as best we can. The debility I mentioned frequently comes after a surfeit of sensations. I see my father, for example, as best I can remember him before he left us to go to America. I see him and sense his loss, and I am downcast even after all this time. There is an empty and unknowable core. I fill it as best I can. Last week, I reorganized his cabinet. It is some years since I could bring myself to rearrange his curios. But there's a pleasure in that I should not deny myself. When I was a child, I played as a child. I liked the small brass-bound telescope the best. I would take it without permission and climb the hill at the back of the house, clambering through the gorse and rough grass until I reached the summit. There, I would put my best eye to the glass, always my left eye for some reason, and I would gaze out into the expanse of the blue sea, looking for the sailing ships of long ago, looking for him. Any historian would say that my father was very fortunate, that he'd been born early enough to be trained as a seaman in the coastal trade before it was ruined by the coming of the railways. It was a time of early Victorian prosperity, and he demonstrates that in the confidence of his portraits. There's no trace of self-questioning in him, and no doubt that is the main reason I have never been attracted to introspective men. But today, without doubt, the thing that attracts me the most amongst all the curios is the Scrimshaw skeleton. A small, dangling, disjointed thing, no more than a foot in height. I think it must be made of whalebone. 'Tis the right era. To me, as a child, despite its small scale, it reeked of Queequeg and Captain Ahab. I loved its disjointed bones and its tiny ribcage, its impossibly articulated knees, and I still do. It still gives off a heady whiff of suffering and retribution, of distance and obsession and loss. Its peculiar attraction is that one can only see the detail of the Scrimshaw carving with a magnifying glass. There, the detail of the men in the small boat chasing what is clearly meant to be a whale, watched by a mermaid sitting on a rock, becomes clear. But it's not only the detail of the carving that is compelling. Somehow, There's also the smell. The odour of earth and bone. A musty smell is like nothing else. When I breathe it in deeply, I see my father and I miss him. And I know that I must do all that I can to control my emotions. That is why I'm worried about Sylvia and her obsession with poetry, and more particularly with that poet, Edwin Waller. I know what this family can do with emotions, how it can compound them into unhealthy, obsessional states. He's here again, of course, the poet. He came last week for an indeterminate stay. That is Sylvia's first mistake, I think, not to set a time limit from the start. Her second is that she should not treat him as if he were minor royalty. She read an article somewhere, she told me, about how Yeats could not compose poetry unless he had a full breakfast and a pot of coffee brought to his room every morning. Apparently, Lady Gregory was quite happy to oblige whenever he stayed with her. "Sylvia," I said to her yesterday, "Edwin Waller is not Yeats, and you cannot afford to play Lady Gregory with the price of back bacon being what it is." She didn't listen, of course. She's incapable of listening. She thinks I want to stand in the way of his inspiration, and incidentally, of her pleasure in being the force behind the throne, so to speak. She said to me yesterday, "You don't understand poetry, Henrietta. Your mind is of a different caste altogether." Of course I understand poetry. Just because I am the elder by some 18 months does not mean I suffer from a crushed lyrical impulse. At the same time, I'm nobody's fool. And it takes more than a nice intonation to capture my attention. I want logical sense. I can't help it. I am my father's daughter, and I know that he purchased this house with blood, sweat, and accumulated profits from the guano trade. It did not come into being by sheer inspiration. He brought home his products from islands off the coast of South America. He hired men to shovel calcified bird droppings into sacks, and then he sold it on the open market. Elegance always has its price, I told Henrietta. We don't live in the best Regency house in West Wales by accident. Daddy left us this legacy, and I intend to preserve it. Sylvia looked at me then. She didn't say anything for a while, and I have learned to be wary when she's very quiet. My sister is of a potentially explosive disposition, and I have to take care not to be the spark that ignites the cordite, so to speak. But on that occasion I was too late. Her eyes looked close together, as they always do when she's angry, and she said, "You think too much about Daddy. You've too much reverence." What kind of a father was he anyway, to leave 2 young children to be brought up by a nursemaid? What was he thinking of? I was too shocked to say anything for a while, but then I did recover. I will not allow anything to interfere with my memory of my father. That is my duty, and I intend to cherish it. "He left us, you fool," Sylvia continued. "He left us to go to America, and he never came back." "You're the one who's foolish," I said. "You're the one who ought to know better." Then I picked up one of the several sheets of paper that Edwin Waller had left on the table in the lounge. I picked up the sheet, and I read his work aloud. "I am the literal edge by the dry shore, the conception in the egg, the hard stone in the secret cave. I am the pebble in the mouth of the sea god, sucked dry by monuments. I am the worn chisel of the masons, the incessant hammering on the door of death. I am that dry thing made of the sedge of the imagination, waiting to be born. If he's so brilliant, why can't he afford to pay for his own breakfast?" I said, when I'd finished. A little later, That same afternoon, I was walking my usual walk near the house. I usually walk up into the hills where the rough ground is, where our own boundary used to be, to meet the open moorland. Or I keep to the lower ground and walk down the drive to the main road and back. That afternoon, it was the latter. I had on my walking shoes. Anyhow, there I was, striding with purpose despite the rain. My main object, of course, was to put the recent altercation with my sister at the back rather than the forefront of my brain. I prefer to remember pleasantries if I can. Anyway, there I was, striding away to full purpose. I reached the main road in time to see Tum the post scoot by in his little red van. He waved to me, and I waved back. So I was feeling calmer, and had turned to walk back towards the house when I saw this tall figure striding towards me. I recognized him at a glance. Edwin Waller. He was hatless, coatless. His short-sleeved pullover offered inadequate protection against the rain. His hair was awry and his tie was undone. "I believe you have a problem with my work," he said. His tone, his normally quiet voice, was agitated. I didn't attempt to deny it, so I thought it best to say nothing. "I find inspiration a difficult concept," I said after a while. "I can't help that." "I don't expect you to help it." His eyes were on mine, claiming too much contact. He was standing so close to me that I could smell the wet wool on his pullover. "I expect you to be honest, which is what I am doing, which is what your father would have wanted. What do you know about my father?" And then, despite the rain, he began to talk.